Hello and welcome to this new episode of Business Africa. I'm Dea Yoka. Coming up, South Africa has been crippled by record power outages with worsening cuts since last year. Small businesses in the Democratic Republic of Congo have long suffered from a limited access to credit. A recent partnership between the International Finance Corporation and Equity Banque Commerciale Congo could be a game changer. Last story, 4 African countries were better ranked in this year's index by agility. The ranking compares domestic and international logistics opportunities, business fundamentals, and digital readiness in the world's top 50 emerging markets. Africa's most industrialized economy is in the grip of a severe energy crisis that not only disrupts the lives of millions of people, but also threatens food supply. To stem the crisis, the president declared a state of disaster. However, critics say this may undermine spending controls. 60 million South Africans have been subjected to power cuts of up to 11 hours a day for months. Eskom, the company that supplies about 90% of the country's electricity, was unable to generate enough power and resorted to blackouts for over 200 days last year. Just as South Africa hopes to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, the energy crisis threatens to impede any plans for economic growth. Many sectors have already suffered, including the mining and agricultural sectors. South African gold production decreased by 20.42% in 2022, according to the Minerals Council South Africa. The body listed, among other factors, the sporadic and unreliable electricity supply as a significant constraint on the sector. With the grape harvest season in full swing, wine production may be similarly hit. Since electricity is essential to irrigating the land, wine growers are worried about the disastrous impact of prolonged power cuts on the industry. In the poultry sector, power outages have forced plants to halt slaughtering, sometimes for half a day, resulting in backlog and the overcrowding of poultry farms. After weeks of speculation, President Cyril Ramaphosa declared a state of disaster with immediate effect. It remains to be seen whether this move, which should enable the release of exceptional funds, will be enough to resolve the crisis. To get more on this, we're joined by Momentum Investments economist Senesha Pakirisamy. Welcome to Business Africa, madam. It's been more than 10 years since Eskom's performance started plummeting. Why didn't the government anticipate such a crisis?
So the major issue around the electricity generation in South Africa is that they underinvested quite heavily in the last 2 decades. And as a result, a lot of Eskom's coal-fired power station fleet is quite aged. About half of our coal-fired power stations are above the age of 40 years. And as a result of more plants going offline for maintenance, it means we have less generation capacity available to distribute energy. And as a result, we find ourselves in the situation where they have to do rotational load shedding, which is cutting certain megawatts out of the system.
President Ramaphosa declared a state of disaster a few days ago. Is it enough to contain the crisis and its impacts on the economy?
Unfortunately not. I do believe it will help. I think it will help to fast track a lot of the regulations and red tape that they can cut through quite easily. However, from a technical perspective, there are some constraints, and I think that some of this capacity will probably only be able to come through online next year. So at the moment, what they're saying is that they want to get about 8,822 megawatts on stream for this year in order to alleviate that short-term energy crisis. But of that 8,800, about 4,500 comes through from 1 unit of Mudupi, which is a coal-fired power station, and 3 units of Kusile. And at Kusile, we have an issue with the chimney stack. And as a result of that 4,500 megawatts not being able to come on stream this year, I think the short-term energy plan to some extent may be fulfilled, but I do still think we will be dealing with some element of load shedding this year.
South Africa's rand fell again earlier this week. Is there a connection with the energy crisis or not at all?
If we look at what's happened to our local currency, at the end of last year, in the final quarter of the year, we saw quite a significant depreciation in the US dollar. However, even though the dollar weakness continued into the beginning part of this year, we've actually seen our own local unit depreciating. And from that, we can infer that there is an element of political risk, economic risk, and maybe even fiscal risk that is embedded in our own local currency that is causing that deviation from the movement of other emerging market currencies against the US dollar.
One last question, madam. What is the economic forecast for the rest of the year?
Sure. So if we look at how electricity and the load shedding issue affects the economy, it does depend by sector. So for example, in the agricultural sector, we have, the majority of our fruit production being contingent on irrigation, and irrigation doesn't happen when there is load shedding. About 70 to 80% of our vegetable production. If we look at the impact on overall growth, we had our South African Reserve Bank previously suggesting that load shedding would subtract about 0.6% from overall GDP this year. However, because we have had a much higher incidence of load shedding and much more severe stages of load shedding, they've now upwardly revised that to about 2%. So they're saying that 2% is going to be shaved off economic growth this year due to a higher incidence of load shedding. In our own forecast, we're looking for around 1% worth of growth this year, moving up to about 1.5% next year. The load shedding constraint is the number one downside risk to growth. We will see a little bit in the way of fixed investment, particularly in your renewable energy space. And exports are expected to be a little bit brighter than where we thought a couple of months ago, given the Chinese economy reopening. And that's also one of our significant trade partners in the world.
Thank you for answering our questions.
It's a pleasure, Ndé.
Equity Banque Commerciale du Congo announced it struck a deal with the International Finance Corporation, IFC. Under the partnership, IFC will back the expansion of the Congolese bank's SME lending operations through a $12.5 million scheme.
The Democratic Republic of Congo has a large informal sector. The country's long history of armed conflict has kept many investors and financial institutions away from setting up shop in this large mineral-rich country. The International Finance Corporation and Equity BCDC Bank have partnered to increase access to finance for small and medium-sized enterprises. CV Malukisa is an entrepreneur running a company that produces peanut butter and jam in Kinshasa. She started her business a decade ago with her savings. Getting credit from banks has been difficult.
They want to give us money today, and at the end, so they give you the money on 10th of February. In the 1st of March, you start paying back. It's not possible. I didn't even cook.
Under the partnership, the IFC will support the expansion of Equity Bank's lending operations through a $12.5 million risk-sharing facility. The bank believes increasing access to finance for smaller businesses will ultimately help create jobs and improve the DRC's economy.
We are announcing that we have once again opened our doors widely to small and medium enterprises for them to get appropriate support from the bank through the new policy that we have put in place. That will, of course, go through proper training of our staff to improve risk management and support our country's development.
The bank is also planning to offer financial literacy programs to farmers, artisanal miners, and entrepreneurs.
Out of the 14 African countries considered to be emerging markets, 4 advanced in the 14th Logistics Index conducted by Agility and Transport Intelligence. Compared to the previous edition, Morocco stagnated, but remains Africa's top-ranked country.
Several African countries have improved their logistics performance over the past year despite global supply chain disruptions. This is according to a report by logistic group Agility and specialist research firm Transport Intelligence. Of the 14 African countries considered to be emerging markets, 4 advanced in the rankings, namely Kenya, Ghana, Tunisia and Tanzania. Algeria and Angola were the only two African countries to fall in the rankings, the report found. Among sub-Saharan African countries, Nigeria had the best domestic logistics, ranking 11th out of 50 countries, while South Africa's international logistics networks remains the best performing on the continent. The best trade fundamentals in sub-Saharan Africa are in Ghana. Kenya, which has taken steps to foster digital startups, appears to be the most digitally ready economy on the continent. In North Africa, Morocco comes out top ahead of Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria and Libya.
Digital is a growth booster. You know that today digital finance is very important. It should allow to increase the rate of banking in Africa, which is very low today, and that also to reduce the cost of transaction.
This year's index also includes a separate survey of 750 logistics executives. More than two-thirds of these professionals surveyed were optimistic about the positive impact of the African Continental Free Trade Zone, AfCFTA, on trade, job creation, and reducing red tape for trade, among other things.
That does it for this episode of Business Africa. More news up next on Africa News and on all our platforms. See you soon.